Hello and welcome to this tutorial on creating generative sound patches using the Novation Circuit Groovebox. My name is Thomas Hammer and I create nerdy synth videos using the artist name Waveformer. Generative music is music that is created or composed by a system, not directly by a human being. It's created from a set of rules and often uses random probabilities to trigger notes or change sounds. In the jam I'm creating today, the sequence from the circuit plays just one chord, triggered over and over again in a pattern consisting of just one step. All the variations in the jam comes from the patch and not from the sequencer. The core idea of the patch is to use an LFO with a random sample and hold waveform to set the volume level of the note each time it triggers, so that some of the notes that are played by the sequencer are completely silent, and it's random which notes can be heard and which cannot. Let's begin by clearing the session. We set the tempo pretty low to 48. And the scale to E minor. The length of the pattern we set to just one step. And over at the editor we initialize the patch, so we start from scratch in terms of the patch, and on the circuit we add just one note for now. And hit play. Back to the editor. We change envelope 1, controlling the amplitude, so sustain is 0 and decay is 81. Over at the filter page, we set the filter type to low pass, 12 decibels per octave, and the frequency, cutoff frequency to around 31. And make sure that envelope 2 modulates the frequency. Then over to envelope 2, controlling the filter. Again we set the sustain level to 0 and lower the decay, so the sound gets a bit more plucky. As you can see, both the oscillators are just plain saw waves. On the effects page, we increase the chorus level, adding a bit fatness to the sound and also spreading it out in the stereo image. On the equalizer we increase the low end and a little bit on the mid end, and also maximizes the high end. And a bit of distortion doesn't hurt. And then over to the interesting parts, the modulation matrix. We set up the first modulation to LFO 1, which modulates the level of oscillator 1. And then at the moment there's a sine wave LFO, but we change the shape of the LFO to be random. Because we want the level of the volume level of the oscillator 1 to have a random level. We set the rate low and set it to a one shot. So it's just the initial random level that affects the level of the oscillator 1. You can hear in the background now that the level is not either on or off, but somewhere in between as well. But we want it to be more of an on and off feeling. Therefore, we set up modulation matrix 2 and 3 exactly the same way. LFO 1 modifies oscillator 1 level. As you can hear, just a few notes are triggered now. We head over to the circuit and add a full chord with an E in the bass. That's a E minor 7 with E in the bass and the G on the top. And you can hear that the patch triggers random notes from that chord at every step. To get some more variation, we let LFO2 modulate the filter cutoff frequency. LFO1 was going a bit fast there, so we turned down the speed and we synchronize the LFO to the key, so it restarts every time the chord is triggered. Next, we set up modulation matrix 4 to modulate the decay of the envelope, the filter envelope. That way some of the notes will be very plucky, whereas some of the notes will have a longer decay. And we'll let both LFO2 and LFO1 modulate this setting, this filter decay. This is just to get more variation. And then modulation matrix slot 6, we bring in a little bit of ring modulation, also to add small variation in the patch. It's LFO1 that modulates the ring modulation, so there's a random element to how much of overtones are added to every note. Slot 7 of the modulation matrix, we add modulation of the filter resonance. Then let's bring in some percussion. We do this through the modulation matrix again, where we set the destination to be the noise level. And we modulate the noise level using envelope 3. And to get a random noise level, we use LFO1 as before. There you go. Envelope 3, we set sustain to 0 and lower the decay. And then basically modulation matrix slot 9 and 10 is just to create a little bit more variation around the noise. So we use LFO 1 and 2 to modulate noise level also here. Over at the settings page, we add a little bit of Portamento and pre-glide just to get a more interesting attack of the sound. And then over at the circuit, we add reverb and delay. Then it's time to set up the macros. We set up the top row of macros to control envelope 1, attack, decay, sustain and release. And in the bottom row we set up the first macro to control cutoff frequency, and the second to control filter resonance. The last macro will control the envelope modulation. So basically the release or the decay of envelope 2, modifying or affecting the frequency cutoff. And finally, macro editor 6 will play around with VSync to add even more overtones to the notes. Let's try the filter macro. We set the filter frequency in the editor to 0, so the macro knob has a more effect on the filter. And that's it. The generative patch is done. If you found this tutorial useful, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for watching. And the rest of the video is just me turning knobs and creating happy accidents. Cheers!